What if events went differently? What if Dr. Otto Octavius had the symbiote in Spider-Man 2, following the theme of the previous symbiote storyline? I heard requests to do what if Doc Ock had the symbiote in the second film. How would this change Spider-Man 2? Spider-Man 2 is a crucial element in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, from the Spider-Man No More to the rise of Peter Parker. I loved Doc Ock's character, but seeing him have the symbiote, what do you think he would do? Would Otto gain control of his arms from the symbiote, or could the arms and the symbiote completely overtake Otto Octavius? After giving it some thought, I could take the story in two scenarios. One where Otto becomes good with the symbiote, or where the symbiote takes advantage of him, completely turning him to the dark side. I want to go with option 2, where we get that Monster Rock type character and see how terrifying Spider-Man would handle the situation. That being said, let's dive right into this Marvel's What If. In this new Spider-Man 2 timeline, we branch off after the events of Otto's fusion reactor failed to sustain. Due to the significant malfunction in Otto's machine, Parker quickly leaped into action to try disabling the machine. Otto wanted to stop Spider-Man. He tried to. Still, Otto was quickly shocked by the spike in the reactor. The overload caused Rosie, Otto's wife, to be killed after the glass shattered in the room from the machine. With Otto incapacitated by his fusion reactor, Spider-Man could only watch in horror as the reactor blew up. Peter looked at Otto's body. Still alive, he felt terrible that the experiment didn't work and decided to switch to his Peter Parker outfit. He walked outside, seeing most of the Oscorp investors leave. Harry Osborn got into his car before the press showed up. Parker walked away, thinking, as the doors closed. The ambulance shut, and this was the last time Peter would ever see Otto normal again. At the same time, a meteor had been floating in space for some time before crash landing in Central Park. The rock began to crack, bleeding out black goo before hiding away. People ran to check it out, but it was already gone before seeing the black substance. While this was happening, the hospital brought in Octavius to remove his mechanical arms off of his fused body. It was fused through his spinal cord. One doctor took out a large blade that would cut through the arms. The arms, now in control, sensed this before lunging and attacking all the doctors before killing them one by one. Otto heard the commotion. He woke up as the arms took off his blindfold. He was horrified to see that the arms were alive. He tried to control them, but at this point, the arms were the next voice in his head. Otto screamed before escaping the hospital. A taxi was thrown, and Otto was almost hit by a car. But Otto's newfound abilities through his arms threw it away without thinking. Otto ran off to go to the fusion reactor. He saw the broken down docks before his arms started talking to him, explaining that they could rebuild. After Otto realized that his inhibitor chip was damaged due to the spike previously that occurred, Otto knew why he wasn't in control. The voices told him that they could rebuild and make the reactor stronger, but Otto doubted it, and he was saying that he and the arms should be in the river right now. But the arms told him that it was working and the machine was stable. Otto thought to himself he couldn't have miscalculated. Ock had an idea to rebuild the reactor better than ever than before, but knew that he would need money if he wanted to rebuild. Otto was being manipulated. The voices said that the real crime would be not to finish what they started. If Otto could steal the money, maybe his fusion reactor would work. Otto yelled, "The power of the sun!" Before he could finish his sentence, something moved behind him. This alerted the arms, where Ock turned his head backwards. He yelled if somebody was there. He said, "Show yourself," before goo started coming out of the docks through the cracks of the wood below his feet. Otto thought maybe it was excess water from the river before it started moving up his legs. Otto screamed and the echoes were loud as if somebody was being killed, but somebody was dying. Otto fell to the ground, becoming a monster, consumed by this alien creature, before Ock looked to see that his arms were entirely black. He turned his head up to see broken glass, a reflection of himself that scared him. It was like a a demon that had taken him over. His face had large teeth. Otto was scared, but a broad smile came from his face. The symbiote blocked the arms from controlling Otto's mind, giving Otto some consciousness back. Otto slowly got up, turning back into his usual self. The symbiote morphed, giving Otto an all-black trench coat and a hat with glasses. He looked in the mirror again to see that he was all in black and he was back to normal. Still, whatever this substance was, it wasn't from Earth. Otto assumed that it was alive and knew that he had to keep this on himself. He would become consumed more, but the symbiote blocked most of this from his mind, trying to take over Otto slowly. The arms tried to talk inside of his head, but because of the symbiote being present, they knew that they couldn't. This relaxed Otto because he wanted to get the money, and the symbiote agreed with the plan to steal it, so they agreed to go to the New York Central Bank. Parker, along with Aunt May, was at the bank trying to regain her house back, but after trying everything, they wouldn't allow them to get the financing they needed. They decided to leave the bank like the original timeline. Otto, who entered the bank, already walked towards the vault, where he lunged at the doors. The symbiote kept Otto's form in his costume, because the symbiote didn't want to cause too much attention. The raw power of Otto's arms and the symbiote ripped the doors with ease, throwing the door towards Peter and his Aunt May. Peter's spider sense didn't go off. This caused the vault door to hit him. He threw himself at the doors, and he threw the doors in anger away from everyone, but everybody saw this, giving too much attention to himself. Peter decided that he couldn't help stop the thief due to his Aunt May. A man yelled, "Hold it," pointing a gun at Otto, who merely laughed, throwing them all aside. Peter watched the man slowly taking in bags of money. His Aunt May had blood coming from her back. Parker screamed for somebody to help. Otto, meanwhile, he took all of the money before walking away. He paused at Peter Parker. Parker looked back before the symbiote covered Otto's face, smashing the exit doors of the bank. Our timeline continues to change, where Peter doesn't pursue Ock as Spider-Man, but is left to stay with his injured aunt, leaving Otto escaping with the money. Peter was shoved to the side where paramedics grabbed the banker, who was pronounced dead. While they rushed May to the hospital, Peter had too many questions. Why was Otto robbing a bank? What happened to him? He had flashbacks of the robbery while going with May to the hospital. The doctors told Peter that she had lost a lot of blood because of the steel door. The doc asked how he managed to lift it. Peter was silent, but the doctor said that there wasn't much time and that he should see his aunt before her last moments. Peter was terrified by the news. His Aunt May was dying, and Peter rushed into the emergency room, but to his horror, there was zero time. Aunt May had her eyes closed until Parker came from the doors. May smiled, but was losing a lot of blood. Parker told them to do more to save her by picking up one of the doctors by his shirt before putting him down. They tried everything they could, but the steel door crushed her internal organs, causing her to bleed to death slowly. May calmed Peter, asking him to sit with her. Parker had missed the party for John Jameson due to his Aunt May being in the hospital, but this day was worse than the original timeline. May talked to Peter, who was listening. May said, "Don't live with 1 second with revenge in your heart. It's like a poison. It can overtake you, and with great power comes great responsibility." Peter yelled May before May pointed at Peter's chest, who was showing his Spider-Man costume. May cried, saying, "I see Ben," before dying in the hospital that day. The anger in Peter Parker was indescribable. The amount of rage he had inside of himself. Who was Otto Octavius? Parker wanted to know what happened to Otto. Parker wanted to kill him, but remembered what his aunt said. Now Aunt May was dead because he couldn't stop the robber again. The doctors put the blanket over her body, escorted Peter out of the hospital, and asked how he was paying for the funeral. Peter had no money or family, and he was losing his powers simultaneously. Peter stormed out of the hospital, where he disappeared into the darkness. Crying on a building rooftop, Parker was heartbroken. He blamed himself for Aunt May's death. If Peter wasn't losing his powers, maybe he could have had the strength and speed to save his Aunt May. The wind from the night sky flew as a Daily Bugle newspaper said, "Spider-Man, creator of Doc Ock." Parker ripped the newspaper before swinging back home. At the planetarium, John Jameson made a public announcement telling the crowd of people that he was getting married to Mary Jane Watson. At the same time this happened, Harry continued to get drunk. J. Jonah Jameson screamed for Parker, telling him to take the picture, but realized that he never showed up. Parker went back to his apartment. Before sitting down, he slammed the door, asking himself, what do I need to do? Peter found himself back inside Uncle Ben's car. Peter turned to the side where he saw Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Peter was in the passenger seat and Peter looked at his hands. He was in his Spider-Man costume. Peter took his mask off and May and Ben smiled. They told Peter that they were proud of the man that he was becoming and that they would always be with him. Tears streamed down his face, asking what he needed to do, and Ben replied, "You start by doing the hardest thing. You forgive yourself. We believe in you, Peter. You're a good person. You'll find a way to put things right." Peter told them that he wants to be Peter Parker, and May said, "I believe there's a hero in all of us. Sometimes we have to be steady and give up the things that we want the most, even our dreams." Otto had been working on his fusion reactor machine for some time, successfully stealing the money from the bank he needed, but one thing Otto asked the symbiote: how would they get the tritium if it was secure at the Osborn residence? The symbiote told Otto not to worry, and the symbiote said, "We will take care of it." As Ock continued to build faster and stronger machines, showing parts of the symbiote tendrils working at it at once. Parker woke up after the dream sequence and he was unsure of what to do, but he walked towards his phone. J. Jonah Jameson left a message for Peter saying that he had heard the news about his Aunt May, and Jonah told Parker not to worry about it before hanging up. Peter sat in his room unsure of what to do, but knew that he needed to continue being Spider-Man. He had to remove Ock from the picture. Peter was ready to get his costume on before a knock on the door could be heard. Peter asked them to come in, and it was Mary Jane. She opened the door, giving Peter a hug. MJ told Peter how she was sorry to hear that May had been killed, telling Peter that she wishes the man who did it could die. Parker vented to MJ for hours, where MJ kissed Peter before revealing that John had proposed to her at the planetarium. Parker was shocked to hear it. He became angry with Mary Jane and told her to leave. MJ asked Peter why he was being difficult, and Parker told her that he loved her. MJ cried, and she said that it was too soon to talk about this before Pete showed her his Spider-Man costume. MJ was in disbelief, and Peter said that he wanted MJ, but it could never happen because Peter Parker is no more, and that there was only Spider-Man. Peter wanted to kill Otto and revealed to MJ that he became Spider-Man because of this, and now it happened again with his Aunt May.